Alright, attempt number 3. I keep rambling on way too much. But yeah, I do want to talk about steels and heat treat. And this was a little bit covered, I guess, in kind of one of my last cut test videos, but I know they're not super interesting or popular to watch, so I figured I would address it kind of here. This was the most recent knife that I had received and done a cut test on. And I did that because while sharpening, this thing was incredibly easy to sharpen. And for it being M390, it's kind of not what you want to see. And yeah, that was exactly what ended up happening. Doing my cut tests, which I use twisted sisal rope. This ends up being like 9.48 millimeters instead of 10 millimeters, because that's easier for us to get here in the States, because we're all imperial instead of metric. But I will do that until I can't slice through a nice sheet of paper. And yeah, this one ended up doing about 170 cuts before it had some problems, which is well under what M390 should be performing at. It was super easy to strop it back up really quick, just like 4 swipes on each side sort of thing going on. And then I was able to get my cuts back to 250 before that same little area there kind of gave up the ghost. And that's a little unfortunate. Right around the same time, I got this guy, which is the Tucson Barracuda from Mazwan Mokhtar. Now, this is an S90V, so a little bit different. But this one also, I haven't actually done a full cut test on it, but I did sharpen it, and it was way too easy to sharpen for S90V that's supposed to be quite laborious to do so. And this is the Barracuda Dash Up, and this is, you know, obviously a very, very new Tucson, being model 328, and this is number 41 out of production. So, yeah, there's still some problems going on with the heat treat there. Similarly, I've had this thing for a while. This is QSP Gannett. This was kind of their first, or at least one of their first forays into using a different steel, 154 cm. In theory, it's an absolutely great steel. Benchmade used it for a very, very long time. You know, once they stepped up to this from 440C in, you know, the late 90s or something like that. And they used it for a very, very long time, only kind of reserving CPM S30V for their super, super high end at the time. So it's supposed to do a pretty darn good job of actually doing a lot of cuts and stuff like that. However, this one also is failing to meet anywhere near my expectations. This guy did, you know, a little bit better than this guy. It did 260 cuts. But to kind of put that a little bit in perspective, I'm currently cut testing a knife here. This is Tucson in 12C27. And this one so far has done 220 cuts and is still going. So it could equal out maybe around the same, but 12C27 is a much lower end steel than 154 cm. And because of that, yeah, they charge you for it. This knife wasn't cheap. And yeah, there's also something that I do worry about a little bit that's happened with this guy, and I can certainly see that happening with some others here. Like this guy is the Civivi Imperium. This one is in nitro-v, which is a fairly new steel for them. Like they have this one and one, possibly 2 models other than that have been using it, but they were all produced right around the same time. It's a new steel to them, and a lot of times companies don't really get heat treats right when they first start working with a particular material. And, you know, I hope that's not the case with this guy. This is the next knife that I do plan on doing some cut testing on, just to see how that functions. And I do have some decent hopes for it, but we'll see. And of course, I've complained about this one a few times. This is my Spyderco Manix 2 XL in CPM M4 that performs like butt. Like I get, let's see, let me check real quick. Yeah, sorry about that. 50 cuts. 50 on this stuff before it really loses that edge. And this stuff is supposed to be ridiculous for edge retention, to the point where it's not a stainless steel at all. It's much more of a tool steel, so it doesn't even really have the advantages of that. But yeah, I've done that and replicated it, as I've done on this and replicated it. It's not really that the very edge of the blade was a little bit burnt from the factory because they were running the belt a little bit too fast or whatever when they were sharpening on it. It's the actual temper on these blades just isn't living up. This one's really unfortunate because, it was a sprint run. And because of that, there's only a finite amount of them, which means, even if, a blade's heat treat was actually covered under warranty, it's not like they would be able to replace it with the same thing because they don't have any. So that's kind of another problem. But I do think, at least for this particular guy, it's a little bit more of an edge case, because Spyderco is certainly well known for doing a decent heat treat on a lot of the steels that they use. And they do use an enormous, vast amount of steels. But basically what I'm kind of ending up talking about here is heat treat is very, very important. And it matters much more the more expensive a knife actually is. Because the more expensive a knife is, generally the higher end steel that the company is going to throw in there. But the hidden factor on that is the heat treat. You can't look at a knife and determine how hard it's going to be, or if it was actually tempered correctly, or if it's just going to be hard and brittle, or too soft, or whatnot. It's completely unable to be seen. And even with some people doing some Rockwell hardness testing, it certainly does help and gives some nice statistics. But they end up usually poking the knives around the tang, very, very far away from where the actual cutting edge is. And unfortunately, when you do harden a knife to a certain Rockwell hardness, it doesn't just become that. Like, it's not, this is supposed to be 60, so absolutely from tang to tip and top to bottom, it's going to be Rockwell hardness 60. It could be 60 up here, maybe a couple of places around here, but could be much different around here. And all of that has to do with the actual tempering time that's being done. And a lot more of these more exotic steels that are being used, generally, a lot of reasons why a lot of companies, especially those, end up charging a lot more for them, is because a lot of these blade steels require a lot more time, finesse, and expertise to actually get the heat treatment right. Now, most of these blade steels do actually, in their data sheets, include kind of some decent guidelines of how to actually heat treat them. Bring them up to this temperature, then let it cool down a little bit to here, let it soak for half an hour, bring it back up, blah, 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 do the quench, all that sort of stuff. I'm not a super crazy metallurgist or anything like that, but the tempering process is supposed to take time, and especially like powder metallurgy steels are a little bit more complex in there. And with a lot of these companies trying to get these higher bleed steels out there because they know that people pay more money for them, they can easily cut those corners by, I'm like, oh, okay, well, the data sheet says bring it up to this temperature, bring it down here, bring it up, bring it back down, bring it up, quench it. So they'll do that, but they don't really pay attention to the whole soaking process, and that ends up having a lot more austenite rather than martensite carbides being formed in the blade, which makes it a lot softer and just doesn't function the way that it's absolutely supposed to. But, like I said, that's invisible to the eye. You can't see that. You can't know that until you've actually used the knife. And with some manufacturers, a lot of times that never happens, unfortunately. Uh, yeah, I'm not really here to rant about Spyderco sprint runs or anything like that. But, yeah. Okay. So, that's basically what I'm kind of saying is, for one, there is an immense abundance of manufacturers using M390 steel these days. Why? Well, it's recognized pretty much industry-wide as being one of the best all-around steels. And that's fantastic because it actually can be that if you've treated it correctly. Unfortunately, you have absolutely no way of knowing that from a lot of these smaller companies, especially the Chinese ones, who are trying to drive costs further and further down than their other international manufacturing, whether it's the U.S. or Italy or wherever else that is manufacturing a lot of knives that they're competing with. And yeah, that does end up bothering me quite a bit. Now, something that is a little bit interesting is that different blade steels, they do have a cost difference, for sure. But it's nowhere near, for the raw material, it's nowhere near just a massive divide as far as cost goes. You can get some 14C 28N steel, like something like this QSP here. And, it'll cost a certain amount. And or you can purchase some other powder metallurgy steels, whether you go for something from Crucible, like CPM S30V, S90V, S110, Crewware, whatever. They make a whole bunch of them. Or Bowler M390, which is particle metallurgy steel and whatnot. And it's going to cost more, but it's not night and day difference usually. And that's because a lot more time and energy and finesse and expertise actually needs to go into properly heat treating these things. And unfortunately, a lot of companies either, one, don't know how to, two, don't care, which is unfortunate. And yeah, they end up doing that with quite a few knives that they know will fetch a higher price because they're using the higher end steel, but they just haven't put the work behind it, and it's really unfortunate when that happens. That certainly happened with these two here from Tucson, and some others, like the TS128 that I've already complained about that use S90V. It's also happened here with the QSP. They've made a couple of models so far in 154 CM, and this just isn't performing either. And a little bit of that is just because it's new to them and they haven't really got the process down. I hope they will improve, but the proof is in the pudding. When newer knives come out and they actually work better, then great. Similarly, I'm hopeful, but a little worried about this with the nitro-v, because it's a new steel to Civivi and WE. They do a little bit better job than some of their other counterparts when it comes to the higher end steel, like 20CV, which they use a little tiny bit of, but mostly M390. But yeah, there's just that problem, and it happens with a lot of manufacturers. I don't really necessarily want to call out just Tucson and QSP because it affects a lot of them. It affects Kaiser. It affects, possibly Concept. I don't know. I haven't handled any of their knives yet. It affects Artisan Cutlery. It affects, all of these different brands. And it's because they're trying to bring their costs lower to make them more attractive to the average buyer. And it works. I have tons of these knives. But yeah, that's something that you generally have a little bit more trust in a company that's brand is super important to them and they want to hold on to. Stuff like Spyderco, Benchmade, heck, I mean even like Kershaw and CRKT. Even though a lot of their knives are pretty low end, they still do a pretty darn good job of heat treating and you know, the warranties and all that sort of stuff. So that little bit of extra cost there goes into the fact that you're paying for people who not only know how to put together a knife, but know how to actually treat it correctly. And that's something that, you know, a lot of these companies are getting wrong these days. And it's kind of gotten to the point where if a knife does come out and it either has an option or it only comes out in M390, especially M390, I'm almost like immediately not interested because I can't guarantee that these things are actually going to be worth, you know, functionally what they're trying to charge for them. And yeah, it happens with a whole bunch of these companies. Now, like I was saying, this one is probably a fluke with the M4, unfortunately. But yeah, it's a nice knife, but still, my original NS30V just outperforms the ever-loving crap out of this thing. So, yeah. So it's not, you know, exclusive to these, but much more often than not, it's either inexperience or cost-cutting. Either way, you end up with a knife that you're overpaying for a knife that's underperforming. And that does make me quite sad. But I will say that a lot of the more well-known steels out there, your 14C28N, your D2, especially those two, but 440C and a lot more of these kind of mid-range steels, I guess 9CR, 18 MOV, they're much easier to heat treat. Ingot steels in general are more than the powder metallurgy stuff. So it does take a lot less effort, which is why you see a lot more companies, you know, Tucson, Gonzo, Free Tiger, QSP, all these sort of manufacturers using 14C28N and D2, and they're getting fantastic results out of it because it's very much been established steels that have a pretty easy heat treat that people have been able to do a really, really good job on. It's just the more exotic the steel, a lot of times the more time and effort you need to actually put into actually heat treating them. And, you know, if you're used to performing the heat treat on these guys, which is relatively quick, you end up having a bad time. And, yeah, that happens. Unfortunately, more often than not. Which is why, for the most part, like I was saying, if I see a knife from a company that I'm not super familiar with their ability to actually heat treat, something like M390, if it's offered in that, I'm not interested because it's going to be much more expensive than it's probably going to end up performing at. All right, well, this is probably a little bit shorter than the last few that I'd tried to go through because I was getting off topic and ranting and whatnot a little bit. So yeah, that's just something I really wanted to talk about with heat treat and kind of how it's affecting the knife market right now, rather than just, you know, as a whole since the beginning of time sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on any of that down below. I would appreciate hearing anybody else's feedback from it. But yeah. As far as I've experienced, a lot of S90V and M390 coming from a lot of overseas companies is just underperforming, but they're still charging a lot more money for them. So, all right. I appreciate y'all for watching, and have yourself a wonderful rest of your day, yo. And consider